and welcome to the Your Food Matters podcast. I'm Dr. Sue Kleiner here with my wonderful friend and colleague, Erik Bustillo.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Sue. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Erik. It is still a lovely day in the Pacific Northwest. We're thrilled to have this a little bit of extended summer moving into fall. And a topic that is near and dear to my heart is all about fish. I seem to be in a really sweet spot for getting fresh fish. If you are enjoying our podcast, please share it with your friends. You can find us on all the different podcast platforms: Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, yada, yada, yada. And
All the things.
all the things. And if you are just dying to see us as well as listen to us, we are on the Move Nutrition Network channel on YouTube, and you can find us there. Yay! So we do have a fishy podcast for you today. And I think that our last episode, if you tuned in, was talking about fish oil supplements and omega 3s. So alternatives to fish and getting in those important omega 3s. If you didn't listen to that and you're interested, it is certainly posted and you can drop into that. Today we are talking about all things fish.
Yes, we're rocking and rolling when it comes down to the fish category. And if you haven't checked out the previous episode, please go ahead and check it out. Let us know your thoughts. Before we jumped into the fish specific category, I did want to take a few seconds just to mention a few omega-3 food sources outside of like a supplement. So like some specific things like in the fish category. I made a list over here. We're looking at salmon and mackerel, herring, sardines, and tuna can all be good sources of omega-3 in case if anyone is looking to incorporate these. And then we have flax seeds, walnuts, and chia seeds that are non-fish sources, and even something like flaxseed oils. And you can even find, in some cases, fortified foods, so foods that were fortified with some omega-3. But of course, you have some more natural sources than others. I'm glad that we're talking about this because I get so many questions about fish and is fish a good option, and especially now so many people kind of going towards this like you have to eat red meat to be the healthiest person, like that thought process. And although I do think red meat is a great source of nutrients, I think it's important for people to know that non-red meat sources of food and protein and nutrients are also beneficial for one's health. And fish seems to be quite a diverse food for the individuals who can consume it, right?
Oh, yeah. So, a couple of things. If you are a flaxseed eater and it's sprinkled on top of your bran muffin, it is coming out the way it went in, as we say. We can't chew up whole flax seeds, so you're not getting the benefit. If you just want that texture, fine. If you're looking for the nutritional value of flax seeds, they do need to be ground. So, flaxseed meal, you can buy that in the grocery store. Typically, you'll find it, hopefully, in a refrigerated section because it can oxidize if it gets too warm. Or you can grind your own, which is, as my friend says, "Oh, Dr. Sue, really? You grind your own flaxseed?" I said, "Yeah, I grind my own coffee beans. I grind my own flaxseed. I have a dedicated little coffee grinder that I use for my flaxseed every morning because I like the flavor of it in my cereal." So um, there's a few other seeds and things that are like that, but really flaxseed kind of rises to the top when we talk about omega 3s. Make sure that you're grinding it if you want to get the whole benefit.
And I can definitely get behind the idea of doing your own things like that, grinding your own coffee beans and flax seeds and making your own bread and those sorts of things. I think that is just so cool to do those things because I feel like we've also gotten very far from that
Yeah.
as a society.
And then one type of fish that people forget or kind of think is not a good source of omega 3s are shellfish. And so, yes, crab, shrimp, those are the various shellfish are good sources of omega 3s. Like I said in the last I think in the last episode, any fish is a better source than a hot dog. Of course, unless it's fortified with omega 3s, which I don't think I've seen fortified hot dogs. But
Not yet.
there are fortified milks and eggs, and so you can look for those. And there may be a few sort of nut milks and various other vegan sources that are fortified with EPA and DHA. Those are the two omega 3s that are most commonly seen. They are not the only omega 3s, and we had a whole discussion about the array of omega 3s and their functionality. So, um, but today is a focus on fish.
Yeah. So now, just speaking about fish, again, a lot of questions around this. I think it could be good for us to kind of start off with what are the benefits of fish? I guess maybe in all accounts from a health standpoint, even if it's like a nutrient density and those sorts of things. So what would you say are the benefits of fish?
Yeah, so I mean, the easy place to start is a wonderful lean protein source. You know, so we know the fats are healthy fats. You know, preventative for cardiovascular disease and thrombosis and all the things that we know about omega 3 fats and healthy polyunsaturated fats. The proteins themselves are very important, good sources of protein and offer variety. So we talk about variety all the time, and I don't think people think of protein sources as offering variety for types of protein, but they are. Fish protein is different than cow protein, beef protein, or pork. I mean, each protein is slightly different. Fish protein may have some specific benefits in research showing management of blood glucose levels, perhaps even what we call mobilizing the stored fat in the adipose tissue in the abdominal region. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of really interesting research on fish and fish protein specifically, meaning that people were given fish protein, not the whole fish. And studying that. So that's like the one easy slot in, really good source and offering variety in protein.
Yeah, I think that's such an excellent point because I don't know, somewhere maybe we can blame like physique athletes or people just like looking to bodybuild or get as lean as possible. Um, but chicken and broccoli became like the food that you had to eat if you wanted to get as lean as possible. But fish is just an excellent source of a lean source of
Yeah,
protein in some cases, and also in other cases where you're getting these unsaturated fats that are also excellent for
right.
health.
You know, now, if you're eating fish and chips 5 days a week, that's probably not. So
That's
preparation
different.
does matter. but
For sure.
but in my practice over the years, when I no longer work with bodybuilding and physique athletes, but when I did, that was kind of our secret weapon: 5 fish meals a week. And to think about, um, fish does not have to only be for dinner. You can have smoked fish at breakfast and lunch. You can have and it doesn't have to be always cooked. You can have canned salmon and canned tuna, and we're going to talk about how you select those and choose those wisely. And so 3 to 5 fish meals a week for both the rich protein as well as the important fish oils. And when you do choose fish that are fattier, they are also excellent sources of vitamin D. So we look at not just the protein content, not just the fat content, but there are not a lot of food sources that are rich in vitamin D. that are not fortified, like milk is fortified. Uh, Fatty fish are rich sources of vitamin D. So those would be, Alaskan salmon and black cod, herring, mackerel, all of those excellent sources of vitamin D as well.
Yeah, and then that way you don't have to just focus on the whole getting sunlight. Sockeye salmon is a really good source of vitamin D,
Right.
which I've never tried it before, but it's a good source of vitamin D.
So sockeye, yeah. So in the Pacific Northwest, I think we just become so we know all the different types of salmon. Sockeye is kind of on fat content a step down from king salmon. Um, and so if you eat king salmon, number one, it typically is the most expensive choice. Sockeye will be less expensive. It will be a little lower in fat, but it still has plenty. As Erik said, it's still a great source and it won't be as oily. There are many people who really don't like king salmon because it is so oily. It makes, I think, an unbelievably delicious smoked salmon, but cooked, it's either way, it's very rich. Nothing negative about king salmon, and Alaskan king salmon, when we're up here in the Pacific Northwest, is the way to go. We are not eating the local salmon from the Puget Sound, any king salmon, because that is the specific food for our local orca pods, our killer whale pods. And as we have depleted the local king salmon fisheries, the natural stocks of king salmon, we are depleting the food for our neighbors, the orca, and so that eat salmon. So we don't eat salmon caught, king salmon caught locally, but it is in abundance in Alaska.
That's interesting. That I think that kind of makes me think of the question around the sustainability aspect of fish and consuming fish and getting fish from maybe better markets or companies that are perhaps doing a better job. Um, does that? I mean, at least down here in South Florida, I don't think about any of that. I mean, I don't think about orcas. I think that they're beautiful and I would love to see
You have
them.
sharks.
We have, yeah, yes, we have sharks and tarpon and grouper and all those
Yeah,
fun
all the good
things.
stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
so the sustainability is really a big issue worldwide. And we talked about how it's impacting fish oils and that Peru had to shut down their fishing this past year. And it has impacted the supply for fish oil because sardines was a huge source, and the price of fish oil supplements are going up because the supply is becoming limited, and we do need to find alternatives. Well, there's issues about this worldwide for different fisheries, and focusing on sustainable fish, consuming sustainable fish is a thing, is important. And I'm not the expert, neither is Erik, but the folks at Monterey Bay Aquarium are, and they have established a wonderful resource that you can find on the web called Seafood Watch. Just go to seafoodwatch.com. And what you will find there is all kinds of information on what is happening with fisheries worldwide, what fish are more sustainable that you can purchase, and even brands and fishing companies and all kinds of great information where you would know, well, this brand is fishing in a sustainable way, and the fish that they catch are done according to sustainable methodology. So it's a great resource, and they will send you a little, you can order a little pamphlet handout that you can put in your purse or your pocket, or even easier, open up your phone to it and see that, and they update it regularly. And so as times change and information changes, they update it.
Yeah, I think that that's huge for us to know because we think that, well, actually, I think a lot of times we don't even think about where our food comes from. So knowing that there's a potential shortage, it's almost like we think that, well, we don't think about where our food comes from, and then we also don't take into consideration that even though there might be an abundance of things, things are also finite. There's also a limited amount of
Right.
these sorts of things. And are there better ways of going about catching fish or even preparing your fish and all of that? So that seafoodwatch.com, I think that's an awesome
It
resource.
and like you said, it's the same in our oceans as it is on our land. What led to the Dust Bowl was the clearing of the forests across the middle of our country so that we could create farmland. Well, now there was nothing to hold down the layers of this rich topsoil that was naturally there. We just clear cut the whole middle of the country, and it led to the Dust Bowl in the early part of the 20th century. And so the same thing is happening in the oceans. We are just fishing to extinction, all sorts of stocks of fish that if we would manage the way we fish, that wouldn't happen, and we would cooperate with nature, and we should recognize that all things alive on this planet live in partnership. And if we think that we are just, sort of the kingpin and humans can just, everything is here for us to use, then it leads to the destruction of nature and our planet. We must live as part of the ecosystem. And so my little philosophical bent, but that is very much an indigenous people's practice, right? They actually believe that in most parts of the world that it is the animal and plant kingdom that has been here for eons longer than humans, and we need to learn from from them, not us just using them only for our purposes. So these are really important sort of complementary philosophies that we need to employ. Even each of us on a daily basis, we can contribute to the better health of the oceans in this way. So um, if you are interested in kind of this safe fish issue for sustainability, Seafood Watch is wonderful. Um, there's also a bunch of other questions that folks have. Don't you get other questions?
Most definitely, yeah. One of the main questions, and thank you for sharing that because I agree. I'm with you. I think that we got to do a better job. We have one planet, so we definitely have to do something to make things better. One of the most common questions that I get regarding fish, and I was hoping that you'd be able to talk a little bit about this, is specific to mercury, right? Concerns about mercury in fish, especially tuna. Um, and yeah, so if you don't mind kind of mentioning some things about that in particular.
Oh, for sure. Well, so the first thing that just to quickly address before we get to mercury is again the sustainability of the style of fishing for tuna. So, for many years and still today, there's a concern about the bycatch when we fish tuna. That there's porpoises and multiple sea turtles, all kinds of bycatch that happens when we're fishing for tuna. And what you want to look for, the most sustainable method is by it's called hand poling, of course, or trolling. Long line fishing is what allows for all this bycatch. And so that's the first question. If you want to look up, you know, any of the canned tuna companies, and even if they say dolphin safe and all that, go on their websites, look up and see, do they tell you that they are actually using trolling methods rather than long line fishing? That is the key to avoiding bycatch. So that's the first thing. That's the dolphin safe concept. But when we get to mercury, there's several key issues. So, mercury accumulation in fish is a food chain issue, meaning that if you're at the bottom of the food chain, a little teeny tiny fish, you don't have much time in your life cycle to accumulate much mercury. Also, if you're not a carnivorous fish, you won't have much mercury. But the much larger fish, like tuna, like shark, like even large mackerel, they may accumulate more mercury over time because they live a long time and they're eating a lot of the smaller fish that ultimately give them an accumulation of mercury consumption. So they will have higher mercury levels. Um, there are recommendations from the Environmental Protection Agency. If you look up EPA, the United States EPA, you will find their advice about eating fish. And it is particularly important in children and pregnant women because if you can imagine, a smaller body is more sensitive to these accumulations. Now, one caveat is that there is not complete consensus in the scientific community that the mercury in fish, found in fish, is dangerous or toxic in our bodies. Um, I am not a mercury expert. I think that ideally, if we can avoid it, we should. But I think there's also a risk versus benefit ratio. We know how important it is for children and developing fetus in a pregnant woman to have these important omega 3 fats for brain and central nervous system development. So, where is that balance between a possible risk from mercury? And we know that mercury is toxic, it is a heavy metal, it is toxic to all of us. There is a natural amount of mercury in everything. It's just sort of in the background. We call it a background level that is in nature that would be there no matter what. But there is mercury contamination in our oceans from industry, and it is growing wider and wider, and it's harder and harder for fishing vessels to find mercury free areas. So, as I said, you can look up in the EPA, they have best choices and good choices and choices to avoid for pregnant women and parents to know of how to feed children. Um, the the ultimate thing that you can do with tuna is purchase smaller tuna. If it's a food chain issue of a large fish that grows in the ocean over many years, well, then get a smaller fish. And so there are canned tuna brands and other options for buying maybe, 7 to 10 pound tuna instead of 60 to 80 to 100 pound tuna and larger. I'm going to give a shout out to my favorite canned tuna. It is a boutique cannery from here in the Pacific Northwest, but I believe they are now available in stores, maybe in Whole Foods. They're certainly available nationwide online. And that company is Fishing Vessel St. Jude. I get nothing from them except their hugs and kisses when I shout them out. They are my go-to brand and I always want them to stay in business, so I shout out for them. They're a small family-owned brand. They troll catch and line catch, but not long line. So pole catch, I should say, and troll catch small tuna. Every year I do see their mercury levels. They send their annual catch to a lab and measure their mercury content. Fishing Vessel St. Jude is called out on seafoodwatch.com as a sustainable brand, and I just love them. And they are so easy to find on the web, tunatuna.com.
That's so easy. And they're also, I just quickly found them on Instagram, St. Jude at St. Jude Tuna,
Yes,
ST Jude Tuna.
yes, yes. So they are lovely, Joy and Joe Malley. I have known them for years. I've watched their family grow up, and they are doing things right. And there are other small boutique canneries. You can look them up. Look up who else is on Seafood Watch. See what you can do. You will find that along with being safe, that you can feel that your risk is minimized and that the contribution to the ocean is higher, that they just taste amazing. They only cook their tuna once, and all of the fats are in there. So here's a pro tip. When you buy the regular commercial canned tuna, where it says omega-3 fats on the front of the label, when you turn that can around and you read the nutrition facts label, it typically will say about a half a gram of fat per 2-ounce serving. Now, fresh tuna has typically at least around, I don't know, 7 ounces of fat per ounce. 7 grams of fat, excuse me, 7 grams of fat per ounce. So, where is the other 6.5 grams of fat in your typical sort of chicken of the sea or bumblebee? Uh, in the old days, they dumped it overboard. Today, it's in fish oil supplements. So you have this extremely low fat and very low omega-3 fat content. If that's why you're eating that tuna, all the protein is still there. And if you're choosing it just for the protein, that's what you're getting. But it also, for me, tastes like cardboard.
Mm.
And these boutique canneries, see, so the large commercial fisheries are processing the fish on board, boiling it, oil rises to the top, they siphon it off, and then they get it to the cannery where it is cooked again, right, in the can. That's the way you can. Anyone who cans know that you, in order to make it safe, you have to cook it in the can. And so it is cooked twice. Whereas these small boutique canneries, um, they still are to scale. They're not, tiny, but they blast freeze the fish on board, and it is only cooked once during canning. So all the natural juices and that it's cooked in, and all of the natural fats are there, and that makes an enormous difference. You will see that even in the water packed fish from Fishing Vessel St. Jude, their fat content is much higher, meaning that you are getting a much greater benefit of all of those important fish oils. So it does cost more. I always say think fresh fish out of your cupboard because it looks like an actual fillet. It is not all chopped up. It is a beautiful piece of tuna, and I can eat it straight out of the can. Their extra virgin olive oil is great that they use every year. We get to do a tasting and choose the best oil. And they're just really, there's a lot to say about these, all of these brands that are putting much more care into the product that they sell and produce. And this is just one of a number of brands that do this. You may be someone who has eaten sort of the Italian glass jarred tuna for a lifetime. I have friends back from in Cleveland where that grew up on that, and it's a similar product. You will recognize it in that way as kind of an original, authentic canning style of tuna. So now that sort of tells that mercury story. um, there's there's a question that I get a lot about, um, Eric, you and I talked about it this morning, also relative to mercury, but other. How do you know it's all fresh?
Hmm. Yeah. Um, that I just wanted to mention something really quick.
Yeah.
Again, the shout out to the St. Jude. You got me curious now and wanting to order from them. That's for sure. Um, but as far as something like that, like the mercury goes, and when we were chatting this morning, you had brought up a point of a couple of things that I had actually never thought of, and I was hoping that you can kind of like touch on that, other than just like it being fresh, but things like you mentioned something about pesticides in farmed salmon, river fish, and farm runoff, and those sorts of things. Um, I was kind of hoping that you'd be able to touch on that a bit, because a lot of times you hear about you shouldn't buy farmed, everything should be wild caught, and sometimes you hear it's okay if it is farmed. It's not like it's the worst thing for you. I mean, what's your verdict on all that?
So there's some real benefits from farming, knowing that we're, trying to save the wild resource.
Yep.
But then there's, just like farming on land, there's farmers who do it better and farmers who don't do it so well regarding the care of the animals as well as the final product and what's delivered to us to eat. And uh, and and when it comes to farmed salmon, it it takes some research to know your resource. And so a number of years ago, and this was, again, it becomes controversial because you're impacting an industry that, is trying to survive, and maybe they're just learning and growing, but do we want to consume that while they're trying to figure out how to do it better? There's various places. So if we just think salmon to start with, there was a study published in 2004. So this is a long time ago. Things may have improved, but looking at the source of the salmon and how sort of quote unquote clean it is, and the reason that there are pesticides in um, farmed fish is because they're in pens and they live in close quarters and other things, they need antibiotics, they need all the things that we know about industrial farming apply to farmed fish as well. And is the water cleaned, and is it managed in the highest level of quality that we know, or is it just kind of sort of done an average amount and then we're eating something that we don't really want to? So this study looked at serving and frequency based on the source of the farmed salmon. And if it was sourced from Scotland and the Faroe Islands, it basically a safe amount. And I'm going to say that this is controversial, but this is published data, and I'm going with it for now. Um, 2 ounces a month is what is considered safe. That's not enough fish, but if you want a little bit of salmon, I suppose. Canadian
That's very
and
little.
right, Canadian and Maine, 4 ounces per month. Chile and Washington State farm raised, and I have a problem with our Washington State farm raised salmon because it got loose, and it is in some areas, and it is there. The pens were not secure, and now we have farm raised salmon genetics mingling out there in the wild, and that is
Wow.
not good either. So that was 8 ounces per month. And then wild salmon, because, well, we have to compare it. Is all, can you eat just as much as you want? And they say 64 ounces per month or a pound per week. So, so that is the relative safety. According to this research, it was R.A. Heights, J.A. Foreign, D.O. Carpenter et al. Global Assessment of Organic Contaminants in Farmed Salmon in the journal Science, issue 303 in 2004. Now, I'm going to be honest, I have not looked for that update since it was recent as of, I know, 2020. There wasn't anything else published, but I'm going to be honest that I have not checked on that since. Um, so, but again, I'm going to say there is this risk versus benefit ratio. And so, if you don't have access to, let's say, omega 3 supplements, and salmon is the only fish that you eat, um, maybe you get the source that you can and you eat a little bit more, maybe a smaller portion more frequently. The other thing is there's a lot of other fish to eat, so you
This
don't
is very
have to
true.
you don't have to eat salmon. Um, but you also mentioned river fish, our freshwater fish that we're out all over the country fishing and consuming. And in certain parts of our country, that is the main protein source because they may be food insecure, poor areas, but they can take a pole and go to the local creek and fish. And the problem is our waterways are contaminated because of farm and roadway runoff. In suburban areas, much more now than it used to be. I know locally here, our local state EPA does a lot of checking of our local creeks and waterways. There is a lot of chemical contamination, and this is showing up in our wild freshwater fish. And so, again, looking at this EPA site for best and good sources of fish, um, what to use. So, these are what I'm looking at does have, again, this is the EPA fish facts and advice for children and pregnant women. I think all adults should follow this. I, 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 I don't want to eat something that's not good for a child or a pregnant woman. So um, this goes from everything from, anchovies and mackerel and catfish, clams, cod, pollock, mullet, herring, trout, freshwater trout. Uh, so lots of a variety, all in the best choices category. There's probably at least 30 different fish listed here. And those are 2 to 3 servings a week. Good choices are 1 serving a week, and you can look that up. And then there's choices to avoid. And I will read that off because it's a really short list. They are highest in mercury levels: king mackerel, marlin, orange roughy, shark, swordfish, tilefish from the Gulf of Mexico, and big eye tuna. So those are very large fish.
Yeah, and I find that so interesting what you mentioned about the safety numbers. 2 ounces a
A month.
month.
A month.
That's I don't want to say it's literally nothing, but it's
Pretty
close to
much.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like wow, wow. It's just and these are things that we don't. Again, we just don't stop and think
Right.
about
And
what
I
the
just want
impacts
to be
are.
careful not to scare anybody away from eating fish. So, our point is to inform you. Now, as I said, that data is from 2004. I haven't found anything similar in the ability to give me, they the published studies need to be translated into some kind of information that's useful for us. And that's what this study did. And I think
Definitely.
that I haven't found anything since 2020. I haven't looked since 2020. So if someone else finds something, go for it. I actually, realize I shouldn't have gotten on this podcast without looking. So I will, and I'll update you if I find something new. Um, but that's a yeah. I mean, we talk a lot about mercury, but what about everything else that gets into our waterways? And that's on us. That is human contamination, and it is a serious problem, both for the survival of wild salmon, but also relative to farming. Now, there's a lot of other farmed fish and seafood, and I don't have the specific data on that. There are places in the world where it's done much better, I think, depending on the various farms. So I know there are places in Vietnam that it's very well done, and then there are probably places where it's not. It's hard to know. Lots of farming from China, lots of farmed fish and seafood coming from Asia, and I don't know a lot about that. There's commentaries about just because it's wild doesn't mean that it's 100% clean either, or that it's been caught in a sustainable way. So this is a complex issue, and I think I depend on these websites where they're the experts to tell me what what to buy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of times that's important to know that there are other people who know things outside of us, and we got to rely on them for our information. So,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, that was so much info that you shared there, and I couldn't thank you enough. I'm sure the listeners are going to get so much out of it.
Well, this is a topic near and dear to my heart. Not only do I love fish, I have to say, I was vegan at one time in my life until I said I really miss fish. um, but then I understood that I needed to make smart choices, and
Hmm.
so that's been
Definitely.
important. And then the other has been that I know people who are in the fishing industry, as I said, and um, they those who are doing it well should not lose their livelihoods, and they are a beacon to those of us who can see that you can do things well and succeed, but sometimes they need a little help. And so there's several other. I mean, I could talk forever about all my fishing companies that my salmon. I am so lucky. I get from one of the very few female salmon captains in Alaska, and that is toifbyseafoods.com, Shannon Ford, and she does a lovely job um, of net catching using indigenous practices and blast freezing her salmon immediately. So it is, and it's mostly sockeye, and it is the freshest, most wonderful salmon that I typically ever eat. And I am so lucky because she delivers it to my doorstep.
Oh, nice. Talk about convenience there.
But she is on the web, and if you're local, she can deliver to you. And if Alaska Airlines flies to your city, you can order from her. You would have to go to the airport, I believe, and pick it up, but you
Wow.
can order salmon that basically is the most delicious salmon you could ever eat. And so um it that's an amazing resource as well, and there are many, many, many more um, wonderful resources. There's another one here, Premier Catch, comes to my farmers market, but they are also online. So just interesting uh, tidbits. And the last one that I get asked, and I know we're going really long, is about sushi. Do you eat sushi?
I do eat sushi, and I enjoy it very much.
So the big thing is people say, "How do I know it's fresh?" And really, if it smells when you walk in, turn around and walk out the door. If it's not crowded, maybe you don't want to eat there. Know that there's rarely fresh fish delivered on the weekend. So if it's Monday, you're typically eating Friday's fish. I mean, um, eh, there's some tips. It should be just like fish that you buy in the grocery store or at the fishmonger. Fresh fish shouldn't smell fishy. It should be translucent and shiny. If the tuna looks as though it was painted red, it may have been gassed. That's a way to make it look more red. Ask the chef if it has been smoked. If so, don't eat it. Busy is better, as I said. So, and then the tuna that you eat that is so common in is just part of this whole tuna question. Bluefin and skipjack tunas are considered safe for health, but the long line fishing technique is considered unsafe for the environment. So, um, you know, ask questions.
Definitely. There's just so much that goes into it. I feel like we could probably even have another episode on these things. It's so fascinating.
Well, this has been a great one. I mean, I am, folks who know me know that I can talk about fish all day. And I do have a lot of this information in my book, The New Power Eating, if you're looking for that, as well as some resources for you in there as well. Um, I encourage people to to discover new fish and seafood that you haven't tried before. Seek information at Seafood Watch. And there is the New Power Eating. Thank you, my friend.
uh,
All right. So I'm going to close this out, and we got a day in front of us. So, Erik, thank you as always. It's always so much fun to talk with you.
Thank you. Thanks for the wealth of information, and thank you everybody for tuning in.
Take care.
Alrighty, y'all.